Hello and good day. My name is Jan van Driel. I'm a professor of STEM education at the Science Education at the University of Melbourne, and I'm the chair of today's seminar. This is the monthly seminar that is organized by the Mathematics, Technology and Science Education Group at the Melbourne University Graduate School of Education. I will be introducing the speaker in a little while and inform you about the proceedings of this this webinar. First of all, this session is going to be recorded, so I want you to be aware of the recording. If you don't want to be visible, or if you don't want your comments to be known to others, then make sure that you do this anonymously. The session will run as follows. Duncan Simmons will give a presentation, and while he is talking, you are encouraged to put your ideas, your questions, your comments in the chat. The lecture will take about 40, maybe 45 minutes, and we will then proceed to have a discussion about the comments that you have made. The discussion will be moderated by Emma Avery, who is a colleague of ours in the group and is doing a PhD on maths and STEM education. Emma will look at your comments, your questions, and group them together so that we will have a good discussion at the end of this seminar. I will first start now by acknowledging the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander traditional custodians of the land on which we work and learn. We pay respect to their elders past and present, and the place of Indigenous knowledge in the Academy. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Duncan Simmons for today's webinar. And Duncan has been a primary teacher for a number of years and taught, specialized in teaching mathematics. He has taught in a number of schools, including schools in the Northern Territories. He joined the Melbourne Graduate School of Education around 2015. He did a PhD, which he obtained in early 2018, and he is in our center, in our group, he's a specialist when it comes to using mathematics and technology to deliver STEM, especially in primary education. He is built and is building a strong research profile and is very active as an author, but also he is the editor of the Australian Primary Maths Classroom journal, and as editor of that journal, he invites all of you to submit papers to the journal, and he wants in particular to pay your attention to a special issue that the journal will publish early next year on values in maths and science education, or maths and STEM education. So you're all invited to contribute to that special issue if that is of your interest. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Duncan, and I look forward to hearing his insightful and interesting webinar.
Okay, thank you so much, Jan, for that beautiful introduction. I think you've covered most of what I've sort of been up to in my life. I did all three of my degrees at the University of Melbourne, so they can't get rid of me. I just keep staying there, and particularly at the moment, given that we're all in lockdown, as you know, I can't even escape Melbourne. So today's talk, as you can see, the title of the talk is A Moral Conundrum, the History of Societal Values in STEM and STEM Education and How It Has Evolved and Shaped the Current Landscape. The idea behind this paper or this presentation is that it is supposed to be provocative. I know that it'll probably annoy, well, maybe irritate some people. Maybe it'll make some people curious and wonder about certain things. But please remember, I wrote this for the purpose of generating discussion, for sort of enriching our research and moving beyond sort of where we are right now in 2021. In very, very turbulent times. So just a quick overview. I'll do an introduction, including my methodology. It was a very basic methodology. All it involved was 3 case studies of 3 gentlemen across the last 200 approximately years who've had either incredibly large impacts on science, or have had, or there have been issues around their place in STEM. And we're going to be particularly looking at sort of some moral and ethical issues associated with all of them. I'm sure that you can see that based on the first case study being Charles Darwin, you can probably get a flavour of the sorts of issues that might come up. I'm determined to keep to time in this talk, to stay to 40 minutes, because I really do want to have a decent discussion. As Jan mentioned, put all of your questions, all of your statements, all of your ideas in the chat, and Emma will do her very best job to thematically analyze the discourse that happens in the chat, and then we can have a discussion based around that. So I think the first thing to note is that STEM is not new. STEM's been happening for a very, very long time. We see a version of Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian Man here. We also see his flying contraption that I don't think he ever built, but I believe there is notionally it should work, I believe. I might be wrong about that, so don't take it as gospel. And then we've also got this guy here, who I'm sure most of you are familiar with, Elon Musk. I think he is the modern day Da Vinci in some ways, although he can say some pretty silly things too sometimes. But I mean, Elon Musk, he's a classic example, I guess, of a STEAM practitioner, because he's moving across. He has his Tesla car company, which is using artificial intelligence-based cars that are supposed to very, very shortly be able to drive themselves. He has the Boring company, which is boring huge tunnels underground in the United States so that hyperloops can be built for really high-speed transport. He's the CEO of SpaceX. He also has been the brains between Starlink, which is this huge galaxy of satellites that exist around the world that will mean high broadband internet for absolutely everyone anywhere in the world. And I've said all of that without even talking about his Neuralink. He's another project that Elon Musk is working on, is an actual brain to artificial intelligence neural link that will be embedded within people's heads. But there's also another thing that he's just announced, and I thought I'd just give you a flavour of it. I'm not going to show you the whole video, but it just shows you the breadth and depth of the work that he's been doing.
Tesla's CEO said at AI Day that Tesla wanted to show that it's more than just an electric car company, and then progressed to announce that he wants to build a humanoid robot called TeslaBot. Musk described Tesla as already being the largest robotic company in the world because of its vehicle's ability to see and understand the world around them, and then act on that information. The CEO believes that it makes sense for the company to use their major improvements in computer vision, but instead of applying it in a robot on 4 wheels like they usually do, Tesla plans to deploy these major developments in a humanoid robot.
Okay, I think we'll leave it there. You get a sense of what he's trying to do. It's going to be a sort of robotic helper that can do all kinds of things for you based on artificial intelligence. We could have a whole discussion about the ethics of artificial intelligence as well, but that will not be our focus today.
So let's see.
Another really a question that comes up a lot is, why do we need STEM education, or is it just a fad? I should have a question mark there. I apologize for that. With the increase, as we move into what's being known as the fourth industrial revolution, there's a real increasing need for students, whether they be primary students, secondary students, tertiary students, to understand the interconnectedness of science, technology, engineering, I would argue the arts and mathematics. So we're not expecting the kids to learn the high level maths and science that's needed to develop something like TeslaBot. But what we want to do is develop in them a conceptual understanding that allows them to understand how such things can be possible. And the way that we can do that is through emphasizing things like computational and algorithmic thinking, which are hot topics at the moment because they're a new inclusion in the Australian curriculum review that was only released a couple of weeks ago. If you're interested in my thoughts on that, I just did an editorial in the most recent version issue of APMC, so I make a few comments about that there. Something else that I think is important is to note that integrated STEM is a modern phenomenon. It's different to what we used to refer to as integrated studies or social studies or general studies or whatever it is. I think modern curricula are seeing a natural convergence that's developing in students in the ways of thinking that support the rapidly advancing fourth industrial revolution, where the students are having to see how algorithmic thinking, yes, it exists within digital technologies, but it also very much exists in mathematics, and not just in number and algebra, but in a number of the other content areas also. This is a long quote. I'm going to read it to you, and I'm going to read it pretty quickly, so listen carefully. It's not that hard to understand, I don't think so, but as I'm reading it, I want you to try and work out who it is. Almost everyone has had occasion to look back upon his school days and wonder what has become of the knowledge he was supposed to have amassed during his years of schooling, and why it is that the technical skills he acquired have to be learned over again in changed form in order to stand him in good stead. Indeed, he is lucky who does not find that in order to make progress, in order to go ahead intellectually, he does not have to unlearn much of what he learned in school. These questions cannot be disposed of by saying that the subjects were not actually learned, for they were learned, at least sufficiently to enable a pupil to pass examinations in them. One trouble is that the subject matter in question was learned in isolation. It was put, as it were, in a watertight compartment. When the question is asked then, what has become of it? Where has it gone to? The right answer is that it's still there, but it's in a special compartment in which it was originally stowed away. If exactly the same conditions occurred as those under which it was acquired, it would also recur and be available. But it was segregated, it was pushed away when it was acquired, and hence it is so disconnected from the rest of experience that it's not available under the actual conditions of life when we actually might be able to use it. It is contrary to the laws of experience that learning of this kind, no matter how thoroughly ingrained at the time, should give genuine preparation. Emma, did we have any suggestions for whose quote this may be?
Maybe Dewey.
Yeah, spot on, Max. Well done. Very good. I don't think we're going to get time to think and reflect because I'm just looking at the time. It was from John Dewey's book, Experience in Education, from pages 47 and 48. And I find that it's just incredible that that back then we had education academics that were already understanding the necessity to draw different disciplines together in order to make really deep conceptual sense of them. Recently in the media, I think in the Australian, there have been a number of articles that have been rejecting the Australian curriculum revisions from mathematics and suggesting we need to go back to basics, we need to just be focusing on the procedures and all of those sorts of things. I think that's a very kind of narrow perspective to take, and I think that whilst we do need direct and explicit instruction, we absolutely need it. We need to show students the points at which we need it and then move forward with it. So the guiding question for these 3 case studies was, when viewed through the lens of societal values, what can we learn from this part of, and it can be one of the 3 STEM figures' life in STEM education research? Okay, so I mean, I think we've sort of had a chat now already about what the difference is between integrated STEM and previous integrated approaches. For me, I'm going to ignore the first 2 dot points. At some point, you'll get a copy of these slides, I'm sure. But what the difference is that you're going to see questions like the 4 questions that we've got at the bottom of this slide, which are: has the author of this paper or report represented data in such a way that it may misrepresent the greater phenomenon being examined? What are the biases, subjectivities of the author of this study or report? Am I seeing the full picture, or am I being fed mistruths, propaganda? And how can I find out? They don't have to be phrased in that way, but if the students are asking those sorts of questions, then I think that we're building what I would call STEM literacies. This one's drawing on the work of our colleague Wee Tiong Sia, and also Alan Bishop, who I believe is in the UK now. They have done a lot of work around values, and values specifically in mathematics. And I think one of the big reasons for that focus on values in mathematics is that for a long time, maths and STEM generally were seen as value-free zones. They were seen as vacuums without any values at all. I'm hoping to show you with these case studies that actually the values are absolutely there. They're there all the time. They may be implicit, but they are definitely there, and they definitely impact the way that we research and the way that we teach. They're also reinforced through unseen algorithms nowadays, examining every aspect of our online behaviour and using this data to further reinforce values for good or for bad. So when we go online and we search for ideological material that supports our worldview, that feeds algorithms that then will send us more and more and more of this stuff, which makes it very, very difficult for individuals to see that that they've sort of been molded via this artificial intelligence based sort of system to go even further down their sort of ideological perspective. So there's significant influence going unnoticed, in particular in today's society as we move further into the turbulent and potentially chaotic age of cancel culture, woke culture, online shaming, and call-out culture. These are things that weren't around when I was a kid. They just didn't exist, and I'm not that old. Oh, some of you might think I'm pretty old. I don't know. This brings us to our first case study, Charles Darwin. We have a lovely map of his voyage on the HMS Beagle. I believe it was the third of the British British HMS Beagles out of 9, I think. He went on a 5-year journey that was originally only supposed to take a couple of years or something, or I think something like that. And whilst he was on that journey, he collected many specimens of many different flora and fauna. And the collection and analysis of all of that data led to him publishing, along with a guy called, I think his name is James Wallace, but he doesn't get as much fanfare. He published On the Origin of the Species in 1859, and that sort of led to his, I guess, his fame. And you know, it didn't take very long for the scientific community to accept that evolution via natural selection is like it is the most obvious explanation for what has happened. That brings me to sort of views, what views that we have in humanity as humans of the origin of our species. I've got two tables here. One is a Gallup poll from the United States, and it runs to 2019. The other one is a poll that was created by The Conversation in 2018. So it's important to note that the Australian study here had a specific sort of population. They were uni students, and I think that would make some sort of a difference. But it's just interesting to see how views on the creation of, or the origin of human beings have changed over from 1983 in this US poll through to 2019, and then in this one we've got 1986 to 2016, because I think that's because 2016 is the last census data that we have available to us. I did look for the 2021 census data, but it hasn't been made available yet. All I really wanted to point out to you was that probably this band here within the Australian university students, you can see that between 1986 and 2016, there's been a vast increase in the number of people who believe that in Australia, or with Australian students who believe that people developed over millions of years from from less advanced forms of life. God had no part in this process. And if we then go over to the American example, so many Americans, I think, in fact, 33% believe that evolution is a conceptually grounded idea, but they believe that it was God that was guiding it. So the process just did not occur through natural selection. Whereas if we look at this darker green line down here, it's much flatter. And yes, there is some degree of increase over the period, but there hasn't been the large degree of sort of growth that we see in Australia. This is just a bit of data that I thought I'd point out. Along with the increase in Australians believing in natural selection, evolution via natural selection occurring across the last 30 odd years. Something else that's gone along with that has been the increase in Australia of people having no, or claiming to have no religion. So if we look at this green bar here, back in sort of 1954, there was barely anyone that was prepared to claim that they had no religion. And there we see in 2016 a large proportion, in fact 30%, I forgot my percent sign there, believe that they don't have a religion. So I would suggest that there's a correlation between the increase in the number of people without a religion and the number of people who now believe in Darwinian evolution, that is evolution via natural selection. All right, how am I going for time? Doing all right. Okay. So as I said, we're going to go through this question for each of the people if we have time. When viewed through the lens of societal values, what can we learn from this part of Charles Darwin's life in STEM education research? Yeah, so despite the inconsistencies in the populations that were surveyed, these were the questions that sort of popped up in me as a result of looking at that data. What impact do these differing beliefs have on science and STEM education? How do religious beliefs impact research science and teaching of science within schools and universities? I'll skip I'll read it. How do religious beliefs of scientists impact funding from both government and private sources for STEM and STEM education? And this one is probably the one that I'm really interested in. How are students to have confidence and trust in their teachers of science or STEM when diametrically opposed societal values impact the very approach and content their teachers choose to teach? So in the States these days, I think there are many states within America where the science education preparation textbooks have evolution sitting next to creationism as you know, the source of human life. I'm not going to make a comment on that. I'm just pointing that out. There's also some interesting, I guess, ideas that we can take out from the Indigenous perspective in Australia around Darwinian evolution. This quote here comes from researcher Luce from 1975, who is describing the fact that as colonialists sort of spread across the country, none of them were particularly, well, I'm sure some of them were, but there were a number of them that weren't particularly really focused on living a European Christian life. However, beyond that time, by the 1900s, Darwinian evolution through natural selection had been accepted by the mainstream in Australia, yet Indigenous Australians were either being taught Christian or creation-based beliefs, or more recently, creation stories reflecting Dreamtime. So there's a source of tension there that obviously Indigenous Dreamtime stories make their own explanation for the origin of our species. And that also conflicts with a lot of the very strongly held Christian beliefs that exist in Indigenous populations. Okay, moving on to Alan Turing, and there's just a bit of a trigger warning here. If you're not familiar with Alan Turing's life, it was quite tragic in the end. So it did involve a range of fairly awful traumatic events. So if that is not something that you want to hear about, turn me off for a few minutes, and then you can turn me back on. So Alan Turing, as it says there, is regarded as one of the greatest scientific minds in modern history. Unfortunately, though, I don't think his fame really became really well known until he passed away. He was the mind behind the Turing machine, which was the machine that allowed the Enigma code used by Germans to transfer information back and forth. That was a coding system that was supposed to be unbreakable. So basically, Turing used what was one of the first computers in order to be able to decipher that. He did some really interesting things too as part of that process. Like instead of just sending out communications that would positively impact the Allies every time, the Allies did things like occasionally muck things up so that the Germans didn't become aware as quickly that the code had actually been broken. He is regarded as the father of modern computing. Oh, by the way, that's him in Cambridge on a statue. So there's in the paper that sort of I've attached to this, I describe this idea or this concept of stages of moral panic. And I think you can kind of see in the way that Turing was treated towards the end of his life, the way that these stages sort of moved through. So Initially, so Alan Turing was gay. Initially, there was some concern about this. It was, in fact, illegal in the UK to be gay back when Alan Turing was studying. I'm just admitting some people. And then that concern can sometimes turn into hostility. So an outrage about the fact that this person working in high levels of government was doing something that was against the law. Consensus, a wide agreement that the threat exists, is serious, and that something has to be done. Disproportionality. So the situation is treated with a ridiculous amount of disproportionality in terms of what was happening and then what the outcome was. And then the last stage there is volatility. So the panic erupts. And then it does dissipate suddenly and without warning. I found that that sort of construct, the stages of moral panic by Cohen, really did it did a nice job of framing, I guess, the situation of Alan Turing's, the knowledge of him being, the knowledge that the broader public had of him being gay, and then what happened to him after that. Okay, so as I said, yep, became known he was gay, and this resulted in a state of moral panic. Social values at the time kind of said something had to be done, because he, and after all, he was holding a very important role. In the UK, as with most, many countries around the world, well, I'd say the majority of countries around the world, was regarded as a criminal offence. He did enter a guilty plea for, I can't remember the actual term of what he was found guilty of. But anyway, he entered a guilty plea, and that was on the suggestion of his brother, who thought that he would get better treatment as a result of entering that guilty plea. And then he was given the choice of either being imprisoned or undergoing hormonal treatment, which is otherwise known as chemical castration. So he was injected with large amounts of estrogen, which, according to researchers, did not actually reduce his sexual desires, but did have the side effect of causing breast tissue growth. Turing's conviction also led to his removal of security clearance, and led to him being barred from his work in government communications. The other thing about it is that Turing and his work were all barred from discussing or making public their work by the Official Secrets Act. And it wasn't until the 1970s that details of the amazing work that group of people had done, and the really important role that they'd played in sort of winning the Allies the war, I guess. So just, I've got to do this fairly quickly. Whilst in about the year preceding Alan Turing's death, he was working on he was investigating the relationship that exists between the Fibonacci sequence and many examples of approximations of the Fibonacci sequence that exist in nature. So yeah, the result is, so this is, I guess, a nice summary of it. He theorized that the Fibonacci sequence represents an incredibly efficient approach to packing biological matter. That's where we see the Fibonacci sequence. We see the results of millions of years of evolution producing efficiently packed biological organisms. And you can see that here in the fern and also in this conch shell. This is, I think this is really important. Turing's genius lay in his ability to observe, decompose, and find patterns and order in the world around him. This is a really nice quote. He himself had carefully chosen topics of interest for the application of his mind, topics that mattered. But more than this, he had to live in the world and communicate like anyone else. And his fascination with computers had a complementary aspect, one of extreme consciousness of the social rules and conventions placed upon him, puzzled since childhood by the obvious duties he was doubly detached from. He was doubly detached from the imitation game of social life. Yeah, he found it really difficult to be in public. He found it really difficult to imitate what was supposed, how one was supposed to behave in society. He was peculiarly conscious, self-conscious of things that other people accepted without working, without thinking. And that's a big theme of this paper. Just not accepting things at face value, but really looking more deeply into them. We'll return to Turing. I'm looking at my time and I've got about 5 minutes left. Now, I'm going to introduce you all to a guy who many of you may not know. He was a software engineer at Google. His name was James Damore. And I think that anyone would say that any contributions he made to STEM and the history of STEM are nowhere near as significant as those of Alan Turing or Charles Darwin. They're not even in the same category. However, there was an event in his work life working for Google that makes him interesting as a modern example of values and moral outrage in the STEM domain. So James Damore worked as an engineer at Google until the 7th of August 2017, upon which date he was fired remotely. The reason he was basically fired was that he along with colleagues had been sent to a professional learning session on diversity, which in my view is a very important thing to do. But they were also asked to provide feedback about the session. As a result, James Damore, who has since been diagnosed with autism, but we'll leave that to the side, chose to pen a memo intended for internal circulation, and he named it Google's Ideological Echo Chamber. That memo leaked incredibly quickly, and a version of it appeared on Gizmodo. For those of you aware of Gizmodo, it's a website, it's about tech. However, the version that emerged had been heavily redacted. So all of the graphs, all of the citations, all of that was taken out, and it was left just as text, basically. An interesting thing that I found when I was researching this was that on the Australian Gizmodo page, they have removed links to their discussion of this issue, and you have to go in sort of via the back way and go to the US version of Gizmodo to find any discussion of this. As I say there, I don't know whether this is deliberate obfuscation, who knows? But it's the first time, and I've used Gizmodo Australia for quite a long time. It's the first time I've ever come across a message like that. So I guess the main ideas he was proposing, which I don't necessarily agree with, the memos were that women on average show a high interest in people and men in things. Women on average are more cooperative. Women on average are more prone to anxiety. Women on average look for more work-life balance, while men have a higher drive for status on average. And the male gender role is currently inflexible. He also stated, philosophically, I don't think we should do arbitrary social engineering of tech just to make it appealing to equal portions of both men and women. For each of these changes, we need principled reasons for why it helps Google, that is, we should be optimizing for Google. These were some different, I guess, polarized opinions that researchers had on this matter. So Jessamine Stevens said, context influences whether it is socially acceptable to take group differences seriously, when one is discussing stereotypes, prejudice, and oppression, it is often unacceptable to discuss the accurate perception of group differences, particularly demographic group differences. And an example of this was James Damore, who did exactly that and was fired as a result. On the other hand, we have other scientists, other people working in science who say, and there are many on each side of the spectrum. Evolutionary biologist Dr. Suzanne Saturden wrote, yes, men and women are biologically different, which doesn't mean what the author James Damore thinks it does. The article perniciously misrepresents the nature and significance of known sex differences to advance what appears to be a covert alt-right agenda. So quite a strong opinion there. I'm going to wrap this up. Don't worry. I know I'm up. My time is up. I think what we might do. Yeah, I just wanted to point out that I guess we face such incredibly complicated, multifaceted ideas and scientific issues and challenges that it does us no service to simply look at one side of the spectrum. We really need to be making sure that we are we're looking for divergent opinions amongst the research. We're not just sort of sitting in our own ideological echo chamber and finding more views that support us, but rather we're looking across what exists and we're keeping an open mind to it. And I feel like that's happening less and less these days. I might show you this page and then I'll just show you the last slide and then I will wrap it up. Okay. I'm not taking sides, so please don't throw angry darts at me. I'm not taking a stance on either side of the debates or issues I've described. For STEM education, it's essential that teachers understand the polarized views of many researchers so that they're able to, I mean, it's really difficult for teachers, but to see that many pedagogical issues, many of the scientific issues are actually hotly debated and they're not agreed upon. And so often they can hear the opinion or the theory or what one researcher has to say and take that on board without truly looking at the spectrum of what's out there. I guess if teachers are aware of the discrepancy held by researchers about scientific issues, they can talk to their students about being critical of scientific publications and scientists. So that critiquing of scientists and their views and hypotheses, that is science. And I don't think often enough our students are made aware of that. In fact, I mean, that research shows that. Many students still believe that science is a bunch of facts and procedures, just like maths, to be learned, rather than sort of theoretical constructs that allow us to investigate the world around us and the phenomena that exist in the world. Whoop. I think we'll move past that one. Oh, actually, no, this is probably pretty important. I just wanted to point out some of the polarizing views that we see are things like whole language versus phonics debates, inquiry-based teaching versus direct explicit instruction. In maths, we see traditional procedure focused on explicit and direct instruction versus problem solving and reasoning-based approaches. What we don't see enough of is these are all of these topics, all of these approaches have value, but we need to see, we need to be thinking about how we best balance these. Instead of coming out into the Australian and having a petition signed telling everyone that that you know, we need to go back to traditional approaches to the teaching of maths that that use explicit and direct instruction most of the time. So I'm going to leave these questions on the screen. They are discussion questions for people to answer. You can answer them in the chat, and then maybe Emma can then sort of put them to me. And otherwise, while you're sort of organising your questions and all of those sorts of things, these are my contact details. So if you do want to get in touch with me, please be nice. You can contact me at duncan.simons@unimal.edu.au. I've got a Twitter account, I've got a LinkedIn account there, and I've also got a ResearchGate account. So Emma, what do you reckon? Do you reckon we give people a minute or two to just...
Yep, so I'll just ask for everyone to, we've got a few comments and questions coming in. So if anyone's got any further comments or questions, please put them in the chat and I'll be going through them. There are a few some comments and questions so far. So Derek has made a comment that there's a book written by Roger Penrose which proposes that if you wish to publish or receive funding for your research, you would do better to write about topics that are more prevalent in the published literature. So really, there's lots of external sources impacting on both researchers and teachers. Have you got any comment on that, Duncan?
Yes, I do. So Derek and I actually have published together quite a lot. And I don't know whether, Derek, you received an email recently. We wrote a paper about the place of infinity in the primary mathematics classroom, which might to some seem like it's kind of a crazy idea, but we did get an encouraging email from a fellow academic, a professor, saying how encouraged they were by the fact that we were brave enough to actually look at a subject that wasn't one that was, you know, like hot and on the agenda. It was simply through Derek and my investigation and conversations that we realized that actually infinity and the infinite plays a huge role even in primary mathematics. So does that kind of answer that question?
I think so. It was more a comment that, yeah, it was a question that led me into.
Derek, feel free to add anything to that if you like.
Yeah.
You can.
Sorry, Duncan.
That's all right.
So we've also got a question from Anne, which actually I think follows on nicely, is how do we influence classroom teachers to appreciate debate and discussion?
That's another fantastic question.
Yes.
I think it's up to us, Anne, as academics, as people that I really don't like being having my face sort of out in the media or anything like that. But I think that the only way that we're going to be able to get that sort of thing happening is by raising our profiles and actually doing the kinds of things that a lot of us probably don't really want to do, which is to put ourselves out there via Twitter, via various other approaches. Also, you know, we can do that. I mean, one issue is that often departments of education and things like that will offer universities, the Graduate School of Education, consultancy work, but it will be of a very specific nature. And so then you're sort of left in that situation where you're kind of being told, this is what you need to teach, which then maybe doesn't allow for that opening up of discussion. There's another problem, and for teachers that I'm aware of, which is that often they don't have access to the same level of scholarship that we have access to as we're academics at universities. They don't, so they, you know, they can Google something on Google Scholar, but then it'll ask them for some ridiculous amount of money to pay for it. So I think, I mean, one thing that I probably should write a letter to James Molina or something like that and just say, can you please give all teachers in Victoria access to academic journals?
Yeah, good point. I think Alana's followed up on that, saying that teachers are notoriously time poor and lack access to academic research. I think you've addressed that somewhat. Scott has said that Cohen has a model for paradigm shifts and how new knowledge is generated and accepted in science. What role might values have in this, and how can we introduce students to the idea of scientific revolutions? Very big question.
That's a massive question. Thank you for that, Scott. Is that Scott Cameron that asked that?
It is.
Thanks, Scott. That's great. I'm all about revolution. I don't think that and so this kind of answers Anne's question to an extent as well. I don't think that we can have this sort of stuff going on unless there's a major change in the way that education research is communicated, and in the way that we bring teachers on board, and also like just from a straw poll, like I've seen multiple articles in various publications quoting the same sources about how bad that these new maths curriculum revisions are. I haven't seen anything published in any of those sources saying, well, actually, our students need the ability to be able to dig really deeply and to be able to, they need to develop critical quantitative literacy, where they can look at graphs and understand, like, what's the difference, what are these graphs telling us, and they can understand that whilst CO2 only makes up something like 0.04% of air, any very tiny little change in that has a massive impact on the world around us. Those are the things that don't get taught if we're just doing facts and figures and procedures that and actually it's not about them being taught either. It's about them being really carefully facilitated, and it's about having the teachers at the very point of need introducing some of that explicit and direct instruction.
Yeah. And I think Bardi has also touched on that as well, is that STEM teaching approach helps students to understand mathematics. So it's not just the science aspect, it's definitely that mathematics. One other question I want to get to before we run out of time is Philippe has said, how do we scale up boundary crossing between schools, engineers and researchers to design quality integrated STEM engineering design based PD experiences that look into meaningful and grounded real life problems? So really, what are we going to do about it?
Yeah, so I completely agree that if we can have interdisciplinary teams that are involved in the planning of integrated STEM lesson sequences, it's going to strengthen them. And I've seen a bunch of research that has shown this. I've borne witness to it myself, but there are a whole bunch of hurdles that exist in order to make these sorts of things happen. If you're a successful engineer, then you're working full time as an engineer, and so it's going to be hard to find time to come across to schools and be part of a professional learning community. Or, I mean, in saying that, I mean, and Philippe is quite aware of this. There are a whole number of organisations that will send out like engineers or scientists to schools to work with the school, but often what's missing from those situations, if we're thinking about boundary crossing, is the pedagogical sort of indoctrination, for want of a better word, of the science or engineering person. So they'll come in, but they won't have a strong idea of what a a really good educational outcome would look like. And if they don't have that, it makes it really, really difficult. And I know that in one of Felipe's studies, he actually went to the trouble of ensuring that a professional engineer did get that pedagogical grounding, and as a result, they were able to offer so much more to that situation. How can we scale it up? That's a really good question, because it's about time, really, and time, resources, all of those sorts of things. So I don't have a really good answer to that. The biggest thing though is that us, for those of us who are lucky enough to be working in maths and science and STEM education, we have a responsibility to stir the pot, to get things moving, because I'm really getting tired of seeing traditional approaches being rolled out and them being advocated for in news media.
Great. There is one question from Anne, but I suspect we're out of time. Jan, did you want to?
Yeah, I'm afraid we are. And it is 1 o'clock here in Melbourne, so we'll have to conclude this webinar for now. I want to thank Duncan for a very inspiring talk. I would not call it a provocative talk, but an inspiring talk, and it definitely inspired a lot of really interesting questions. I hope that the questions will be saved and just like the recording and made available. People can see Duncan's contact details, and he encouraged all of you to contact him if you want to have a further discussion. For me, your talk is more than anything else a call or a reminder, maybe, for all of us who are involved in education, whether we're researchers or teachers or policymakers, to try to understand each other's perspectives before coming to sometimes very firm judgments. And I think that call for mutual understanding is probably more important than it ever was before. So thank you very much for your talk, Duncan. Thanks all of you for attending. Our next webinar will be on the Wednesday, 20th of October, same time, and the guest speaker that day will be Dr. Liwa Xu from Deakin University. I hope to see many of you then again. And for now, have a good day and see you later.